All right, folks, buckle up because today we're diving into a story that's got more twists and turns than, than a Tesla on autopilot, maybe.
I think that's an apt comparison, considering who's at the center of this story.
That's right. We're talking about Elon Musk, the man behind Tesla, SpaceX, and X, and he's found himself in the middle of a political showdown that's got everyone talking.
It's a fascinating case, and it really highlights the sometimes blurry lines between private enterprise and the power of the government.
So let's break it down for our listeners who might be just tuning in. Elon Musk is involved with this White House initiative called DOGE, the Department of Government Efficiency. Their goal is to slash government spending.
DOGE actually dates back to the beginning of President Trump's term. It was created by executive order on his very first day in office.
So it's been around for a while, but it's really come under fire recently because 14 Democrat-led states are suing to stop Musk and DOGE.
Yeah, they're claiming that Musk is basically acting like he's in charge, wielding way too much power and operating outside the bounds of the Constitution.
And they're specifically concerned about his access to sensitive government data and the potential for him to make sweeping changes without any real oversight.
That's right. They're arguing that his level of influence, given his official title is special government employee and senior advisor to the president, is exceeding what's considered acceptable.
And get this, they've got some pretty strong evidence to back up their claims. We're talking about Musk openly advocating for entire agencies to be deleted, which is a pretty radical move even for him.
It certainly raises eyebrows, and I can only imagine how unsettling it must be for federal employees in those targeted agencies.
And it doesn't stop there. DOGE has been pretty vocal on social media, too, bragging about canceling government contracts.
Yeah.
It all paints a picture of a very aggressive approach to cutting costs.
And the states are arguing that this aggressive approach has led to what they're calling mass chaos and confusion within the government. They're claiming that Musk's actions, or at least the perception of his actions, are disrupting the normal functioning of these agencies, creating a climate of fear and uncertainty.
So this whole thing has landed in the courtroom of U.S. District Judge Tanya Chutkan. The states went in swinging, requesting a temporary restraining order to stop Musk and DOGE dead in their tracks.
Yeah, they wanted to block access to data, prevent any further spending cuts, and basically freeze any major actions until this whole thing gets sorted out legally.
Their argument is based on the Constitution's Appointments Clause, which outlines the process for appointing government officials. They're saying that Musk is essentially acting as a high-level official without having gone through the proper channels.
Meaning he wasn't nominated by the president and confirmed by the Senate, which is the standard procedure for positions with this much power.
And they're saying that this lack of a formal appointment makes Musk's influence unconstitutional and sets a dangerous precedent for private citizens wielding power within the government. So did the judge slam on the brakes and grant that restraining order?
Well, not quite. Judge Chutkan denied the state's request, stating that they hadn't proven they would suffer what she called imminent irreparable harm.
So round one goes to Musk and DOGE.
It's not a complete victory, though. While Judge Chutkan denied the temporary restraining order, she didn't dismiss the lawsuit entirely. In fact, she expressed some pretty serious concerns, calling the situation both concerning and troubling.
That sounds like a pretty big red flag coming from a federal judge.
Ah!
What exactly did she find so troubling?
She specifically questioned how a private citizen like Musk could have such significant influence over government operations without having gone through the traditional vetting and appointment process. And she seemed particularly worried about the lack of congressional oversight over DOGE's activities.
Okay, so the judge is letting things play out for now, but she's clearly keeping a close eye on this whole situation.
Absolutely. And her comments definitely suggest that the states still have a fighting chance in this lawsuit. It's far from over.
All right, so the legal battle is heating up. But what about the Justice Department? How are they defending Musk and DOGE's actions?
Their main argument is that the states are exaggerating Musk's role and influence. They're basically saying, hey, he's just an advisor, not the one calling the shots. They claim there isn't a single instance of Musk directly ordering any government actions.
But even if he's not giving direct orders, couldn't his suggestions and recommendations still carry a lot of weight? Especially given his stature and his relationship with the president.
That's precisely the point the states are trying to make. They're arguing that Musk's influence goes far beyond simply offering advice. They believe he's actively shaping policy and directing actions, even if it's not always through those formal channels.
So we've got this blurry line between official advisor and behind-the-scenes power broker.
Exactly. And that's where things get really interesting. Because even if the Justice Department can prove that Musk isn't directly issuing orders, the question remains, How much influence is too much when it comes to a private citizen impacting government decisions?
That's a pretty big question, with some potentially far-reaching consequences. We'll need to dig into that a bit deeper. But first, let's take a closer look at the specific agencies that the states are trying to protect. This isn't just some abstract legal debate after all. We're talking about real people and their livelihoods potentially being affected by these spending cuts and potential agency overhauls.
You're absolutely right. And the impact on these agencies could be significant. We're talking about essential services that millions of Americans rely on.
So let's get specific. Which agencies are we talking about here?
The states are seeking to protect 7 federal agencies: the Office of Personnel Management and the Departments of Education, Labor, Health and Human Services, Energy, Transportation, and Commerce.
Wow, that's a pretty broad swath of government functions. Everything from education to energy to transportation. It sounds like they're worried about potential widespread disruption across multiple sectors.
Exactly. And you have to consider the ripple effects. For example, cuts to the Department of Education could impact funding for schools and student loans. Reductions at the Department of Energy might affect research into renewable energy sources or regulations on fossil fuels. And any changes at the Department of Transportation could have implications for infrastructure projects or safety regulations. So we're not just talking about numbers on a spreadsheet, we're talking about real-world impacts on people's lives.
And the states are claiming that these agencies are particularly vulnerable because they haven't had time to prepare for these potential cuts or implement any changes in a thoughtful and strategic way.
That's a key part of their argument. They're saying that Musk and DOGE's approach has been too hasty and reckless, leading to unnecessary chaos and uncertainty. They're arguing that a more measured and deliberate approach is needed to ensure that any cuts are made in a way that minimizes disruption and protects essential services.
So even though the judge denied the temporary restraining order, she didn't exactly give Musk and DOGE free rein. She still expressed some pretty strong reservations about their methods.
Oh, absolutely. Her comments during the hearing were quite pointed. She said that the potential for mass firings of federal workers is not a small or common thing. And she highlighted that Musk's appointment process didn't follow the traditional path of being nominated by the president and confirmed by the Senate.
Which, as we discussed earlier, is the standard procedure for appointing high-level government officials.
Precisely. And she seemed particularly concerned about the lack of congressional oversight over DOGE's activities.
It almost sounds like she's sending a warning shot across the bow, letting Musk and DOGE know that she's watching them closely.
I think that's a fair assessment. She's making it clear that she's not going to rubber stamp their actions and that they need to proceed with caution. She's essentially saying, I'm not shutting you down completely, but I'm keeping a close eye on things, and I expect you to act responsibly and within the bounds of the law.
Okay, so the legal battle is far from over. What are the possible outcomes here? What happens if the states ultimately win this lawsuit?
Well, if the states prevail, it could have major implications for the future of private influence in government. It could set a precedent that limits the ability of private citizens, even those with vast resources and connections, to exert undue influence over government policy and operations.
That would be a pretty significant shift in the power dynamic.
It would, and it would likely lead to more scrutiny of any future collaborations between the government and private individuals, particularly when it comes to sensitive areas like spending cuts or agency overhauls.
Essentially, it could set a higher bar for transparency and accountability when it comes to private citizens participating in government initiatives.
Exactly. It would force the government to be more careful about how it engages with private individuals and to ensure that those individuals are acting within the bounds of the law and with appropriate oversight.
And on the flip side, what happens if the Justice Department manages to convince the court that Musk's role is perfectly legitimate and that the states are overreacting?
Well, in that scenario, it would likely solidify Musk's position and give DOGE even more latitude to pursue its agenda of shrinking the government and cutting spending.
Which could mean some pretty drastic changes for the agencies we just talked about and the services they provide to millions of Americans.
Absolutely. It could lead to significant reductions in funding, staffing, and programs across multiple sectors of the government. And depending on how those cuts are implemented, they could have a ripple effect throughout the economy and society as a whole.
So, regardless of who wins this legal battle, the stakes are incredibly high. This case has the potential to reshape the relationship between the government and private citizens, and the outcome will have a lasting impact on how the government operates and the services it provides.
There's no doubt about that. This is a pivotal moment, not just for DOGE and the agencies involved, but for the broader principles of democratic governance and accountability.
It's like something out of a political science textbook come to life, isn't it? This whole situation raises some fundamental questions about power influence and the role of private individuals in shaping government policy.
It does. And it highlights the need for a robust public discourse about these issues. We need to be having conversations about how to strike the right balance between leveraging private sector expertise and safeguarding democratic principles.
Okay, so we've got this high-stakes legal battle playing out with potentially far-reaching consequences for the future of government. But let's step back for a moment and consider the broader implications of this whole situation. It's not just about DOGE and Musk, right? This case raises some fundamental questions about the role of private citizens in government and the potential for conflicts of interest when individuals with vast wealth and influence become involved in shaping public policy.
You're hitting on a crucial point. This case isn't just about the specifics of DOGE or the legality of Musk's appointment. It's forcing us to confront some uncomfortable truths about the influence of money and power in our political system.
It's almost like something out of a science fiction novel, isn't it? A billionaire CEO swooping in to reshape the government according to his own vision.
It does have a certain dystopian feel to it. And that's what makes this case so fascinating and so unsettling. It's forcing us to grapple with questions about who really holds the power in our society and how that power is exercised.
And it's not just about Musk. He's just one example of a growing trend of wealthy individuals and corporations exerting their influence on government policy.
Exactly. And this trend raises concerns about whether the government is becoming increasingly beholden to special interests and whether the needs of ordinary citizens are being overlooked.
It's a slippery slope, isn't it? If we allow private individuals to wield too much power within the government, we risk undermining the principles of democratic accountability and transparency.
Precisely. And that's why this case is so important. It's not just about Musk and DOGE, it's about the integrity of our democratic institutions and the need to ensure that the government serves the interests of all citizens, not just the select few.
So where do we go from here? What can we as citizens do to ensure that the government remains accountable to the people it's supposed to represent?
Well, for starters, we need to be informed and engaged. We need to pay attention to what's happening in our government and hold our elected officials accountable.
Right, because if we're not paying attention, these kinds of situations can easily slip under the radar.
Exactly. And we need to be willing to speak out and challenge those in power when we see something that's not right.
So it's not just about voting every few years. It's about staying actively involved in the political process and holding our leaders accountable.
Precisely. We need to be vigilant in safeguarding our democracy and ensuring that the government remains a force for good in our society.
Okay, so we've talked about the legal battle, the potential outcomes, and the broader implications of this whole Musk-DOGE saga. But there's one more piece of this puzzle we need to examine, and that's the public perception of all of this. How are people reacting to this situation? Are they concerned about Musk's involvement in the government? Are they supportive of DOGE's goals? Let's take a look at what the public is saying and try to understand how this case is playing out in the court of public opinion.
That's a great point. Public perception is a powerful force, and it can have a significant impact on how this whole situation unfolds.
Exactly. Public pressure can sway politicians, influence judges, and even shape the outcome of legal battles. So understanding how the public is reacting to this case is crucial if we want to get a complete picture of what's going on.
Absolutely. Public sentiment can act as a check on power, holding those in authority accountable to the people they represent. And in this case, it's particularly interesting to see how the public is navigating the complex issues of private influence, government efficiency, and democratic principles.
Okay, so let's dig into the public's reaction. What are people saying about Musk's involvement in the government? Are they cheering him on as a bold innovator who can shake things up? Or are they worried about the implications of a billionaire CEO wielding so much influence?
Well, the public's reaction has been quite divided, reflecting the broader societal tensions around wealth power and the role of government.
So it's not a clear-cut case of everyone being on one side or the other.
Not at all. There are strong opinions on both sides of the spectrum, and the debate is playing out across social media, news outlets, and even dinner tables across the country.
Okay, so let's break it down. What are the main arguments being made by those who are supportive of Musk's involvement in DOGE? What are they hoping to see happen?
Well, those who support Musk and DOGE tend to emphasize his track record of innovation and disruption in the private sector. They believe that he can bring that same energy and outside-the-box thinking to the government, leading to much-needed modernization and efficiency.
So they see him as a sort of superhero CEO who can swoop in and fix everything that's wrong with the government?
That's a good analogy. They believe that he's not afraid to challenge the status quo, shake things up, and make tough decisions that others have been too timid to make.
And they're hoping that DOGE will lead to a smaller, leaner, more efficient government that's less wasteful and bureaucratic.
Exactly. They believe that DOGE has the potential to streamline government operations, cut unnecessary spending, and ultimately deliver better services to citizens.
Okay, that's one side of the story. But what about the other side? What are the concerns being voiced by those who are skeptical of Musk's involvement in DOGE?
Well, those who are critical of Musk's involvement tend to focus on the potential risks and downsides of having a private citizen with such vast wealth and influence-wielding power within the government.
They're worried about the potential for conflicts of interest, undue influence, and a lack of accountability.
Exactly. They argue that Musk's personal interests, particularly his businesses, could influence his decisions in a way that benefits him personally while potentially harming the public good.
And they're also concerned about the lack of transparency and oversight surrounding DOGE's operations.
That's a key issue. They argue that DOGE is operating in a shroud of secrecy, making it difficult to assess its actions and hold it accountable.
So we've got this clash of perspectives playing out in the public arena. Some see Musk as a potential savior who can fix the government, while others see him as a threat to democratic principles.
That's a great way to summarize it. And this clash of opinions reflects the broader societal debate about the role of wealth and power in our democracy.
It's a debate that's likely to continue long after this particular legal battle is resolved.
Absolutely. And it's a debate that we as citizens need to be actively engaged in if we want to ensure that our government remains accountable to the people it represents.
Okay, so we've explored the legal arguments, the potential outcomes, and the public's reaction to this whole Musk-DOGE saga. But as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with a thought-provoking question. What are the limits of private influence in government?
That's a great question, and it's one that we need to be grappling with as a society.
Where do we draw the line between leveraging private sector expertise and safeguarding democratic principles?
It's a delicate balance, and there's no easy answer. But it's a conversation that we need to be having if we want to ensure that our government remains a force for good in our society.
All right, so we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive. We've explored the legal battle, the potential outcomes, the public's reaction, and the broader implications of this whole Musk-DOGE saga. But as always, there's more to the story. And we'll continue to follow this case closely and keep you updated on any major developments.
And as always, we encourage you to stay informed, engaged, and to continue asking tough questions about the role of power and influence in our society.
It's like we're living in some kind of real-life political drama with this whole Musk and DOGE situation. On the one hand, you have people who are applauding the idea of someone like Musk with his business savvy, shaking up the bureaucracy. They're looking for, tangible results, less waste in government.
It's understandable, right? People are frustrated with government inefficiency. They want to see their tax dollars used effectively. And Musk has this reputation as a doer, someone who gets things done.
It's exactly. He launches rockets, he builds electric cars, and now he's tackling government waste. It's a pretty compelling narrative. But then you have the other side, the folks who are really uncomfortable with this level of influence from someone who isn't elected, who's accountable primarily to his shareholders, not the American people.
It's a valid concern. We have systems in place for a reason, checks and balances, transparency, accountability. And those systems weren't really designed with this kind of scenario in mind.
It's almost like we're trying to fit square peg into a round hole. We've got these existing structures of government, and then you have this force of nature like Musk who doesn't quite fit neatly into those structures.
It's creating this tension, a friction point, that's forcing us to re-examine how we think about power influence and the role of private individuals in shaping public policy.
I'm curious from your perspective, what historical parallels do you see here? Have we ever encountered a situation like this before, where a private citizen has had this level of sway within the government?
It's definitely unusual to have someone like Musk operating with this level of autonomy within the executive branch. But, there have been other instances throughout history where wealthy individuals or private interests have exerted significant influence on government policy. Think about the railroad tycoons of the 19th century or the industrialists of the early 20th century. They wielded immense power, and they often shaped government decisions to benefit their own interests.
So this idea of private influence isn't entirely new. But perhaps it's the scale and the speed at which it's happening, in this case with Musk and DOGE, that are making people so uneasy.
I think that's a key factor. We live in a world where information travels at lightning speed, and decisions can be made and implemented much faster than in the past. That creates a sense of urgency and a feeling that things are happening beyond our control.
It's like we're on this runaway train, and we're not sure where it's headed or who's actually in control.
And that uncertainty breeds anxiety. People want to understand how power is being exercised and who's making the decisions that affect their lives.
So as this legal battle plays out, and as DOGE continues its work, what should we as citizens be paying attention to? What are the key indicators that things are moving in a positive direction? That this experiment, if you will, is working?
I think transparency is key.
Yeah.
We need to be able to see what DOGE is doing, how decisions are being made, and what criteria are being used to evaluate success. Are there clear metrics for measuring efficiency? Are there mechanisms for public input and feedback?
So it's not just about cutting costs, it's about doing so in a way that's open, accountable, and aligned with the public interest.
Exactly. And we also need to be mindful of the potential unintended consequences of these actions. What impact will these cuts have on the ability of agencies to deliver essential services? Will they disproportionately impact certain populations or regions?
Right, because saving money is only a good thing if it doesn't come at the expense of essential services or fairness.
Precisely. It's about finding that sweet spot, that balance between efficiency and effectiveness, between fiscal responsibility and social equity.
I think that's a great point to end on. We need to be having these nuanced conversations, asking tough questions, and holding our leaders accountable. The future of our government, and indeed our democracy, depends on it.
I couldn't agree more.
Thanks for diving deep with us today. This story is far from over, so stay tuned, stay informed, and most importantly, stay engaged.
Until next time.